continue with our Theology of the Body Mondays. And last time we were talking about chastity. We kind of talked about how chastity is a virtue, right? It's a virtue, is an inner muscle that allows us to do a particular good. Like honesty is a muscle of being able to tell the truth. And in the case of chastity is an inner muscle of the soul that helps us use our sexual desires for the sake of loving, of giving of ourselves rather than taking or using another. Today I want to talk about the opposite of chastity, and then a couple corollaries of these two things. So the opposite of chastity is lust. So lust is a vice. And so we could potentially say that a vice is a particular weakness that leads us to do an evil. And perhaps not only a weakness, but almost like a malformed inner muscle, right, that makes us just really prone to doing a particular evil, right? And so you can think of the vice of dishonesty, and somebody who really is weak at the virtue of honesty and has a vice of dishonesty would just be lying left and right, even in things that there's no reason to lie at all, and they just can't help it, right? It's almost this malformed muscle of just going towards that, right? And it's almost like you have these two opposites between vice and virtue, right? As the muscle grows, you kind of move, and you can be kind of in a sort of spectrum there, right, where you can fall. And so lust can't help but use sexual desires to use another rather than to love. And important here to say that's, I think, already very implied in everything we've been talking about, but maybe just to explicitly say it, to experience sexual desire, that in itself is not lust. Experience sexual desire, that in itself is not lust. To experience attraction is not a sin in itself or anything like that. It's not lust. But when lust comes in, is that as this desire is experienced, it gets carried away, and then it loses the whole thing we'll be talking about the personalistic norm. It loses the perspective that the one in front of me is a person. This perspective is lost because somehow the desire gets carried away, and so then the person disappears, whether it's myself or somebody else, right? The person disappears, and then it just becomes kind of an object of attraction, right? To be, again, then used, right? At least to using, because I can abstract away and forget that it is a person, right? And so it then leads usually to actions that are not good, whether it's an inner attitude or action or thoughts or actions, etc., right? And so so that's kind of what lust is. Now, I mentioned last time that I think our society is unknowingly really desiring chastity, right? I spoke about the Me Too movement, the sense like there should be no abuse, sex should always be consensual, adultery is not good, unfaithfulness is not good, and so in a sense, like our society is saying, yes, like we want more chastity, more using of our sexual desires for the sake of love, and we don't want lust. But in a sense, our culture wants this. In another sense, there's a paradox in our culture because it's also very self-contradictory. Because our culture also says, never deny yourself any pleasure. Do anything you want. All is permitted. Say yes to all your desires. And so, obviously, what does this lead to? This leads to a lack of control of our desires. Right? And so if we get so used to saying yes to everything, every little desire that you have, is like you should never say no to any desire that comes into your heart. Unless, of course, it's not consensual. But other than that, you say yes to all your desires. There comes a point when you've never learned how to say no to a desire. Right? And so since we don't know how to say no to a desire, then we end up having this vice of always saying yes to any desire that comes to me, whether it's sexual in nature or just other desires too, right? We can't help but say yes because we have this weak muscle that's never been used, a muscle that's never been used to say no to a desire that comes in our hearts, right? And so when the desire is not good, I can't say no, and so I just continue with the desire because I can't help but pursue the desire. And so it's just a paradox in our culture, right? A paradox where all is permitted but nothing is forgiven and all this kind of stuff, right? So maybe this leads to kind of like, well, how does one grow in chastity, right? Right. If you think about muscle, right? There's exercises to build any muscle, right? And one grows a particular muscle by exercising that particular muscle. And so some of the ways in which we can grow in chastity, one is just learning about it, understanding what it is, which is kind of what we've been doing here. Just knowing, understanding kind of how it's something, a virtue that leads and opens a path to love. It's so much a broader, wider, more beautiful understanding. So first, just learning about it, then seeking always to personify the other, right? See, always trying to be aware that people are indeed people, and never abstracting away from people, fighting to have that. Even it's like a mental fight, if needed, if that's something we struggle with. So that's another way. And then the third way, and I think this was really important, is doing little acts of self-denial. And little acts of self-denial are actually super part of of the Christian life. And they don't only help us grow in chastity, but in a lot of other virtues, because little acts of self-denial help us grow in self-control, would help us to love, can help you be more patient, it can help you to give yourself more to another, because you're being used to saying no to yourself for the sake of something else, right? If we grow, and let me expound what this means of little acts of self-denial. If I grow in my ability of saying no to legitimate goods, it builds my muscle of saying no to something that I desire. And so later, when I desire something that's not good or not great, because I'm used to saying no to some desires that I have, then it's easy for me to say no to that desire, right? If I cannot say no to that, fifth donut, then I'm not going to be able to say no to any other desire that comes up, right? And so it should be part of our rule of life, plan of life. Like when you think about different practices that we do, like every day maybe I pray the rosary, or I come to the mass on Mondays. We have a plan of life, a rule of life, a rule of love, things, the spiritual disciplines that we do for the sake of being close to the Lord. So doing a little acts of self-denial should be part of our rule of life. And so one could say, okay, part of my rule of life is going to be that I'm going to do one little act of self-denial every day. And so Monday comes along and you say, well, this week, a little act of self-denial I'm going to do every day is that I'm not going to put any creamer in my coffee. Super small, and putting creamer in your coffee is not evil at all, but just you choosing, you could have creamer, there's nothing evil about it, but you choosing that week to not have creamer, there's this little act of saying no to something you desire, right? After the week is done, next week you say, well, I'm not going to put ice in my water because I love my water really cold. Okay, well, then that week you do that, right? Every week, if you're doing something small, you're saying no to something that you like and it's a legitimate good, kind of builds this muscle. It's like it's okay to say no to a particular desire. And especially when these acts of denial are done with love, it's not about white knuckling, just saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna, whatever. No, it's about doing things with love, and they bear great fruit. It's almost like a prayer in itself. You do it for the Lord and for the sake of growing in love, not just for the sake of this self-obsession, self-perfection. I want to be strong and it's all about me, but you can offer these things out of love. And so this helps, it's super important for growth in chastity, but really it just links up to growing in all virtues and the Christian. And we'll continue next week.